Non-dualism as the foundation of dualism, the case of Shinran Shōnin, by Perry Schmidt-Leukel. Pure Land Buddhism, a dualist deviation? Pure Land Buddhism is a strand of Mahāyāna Buddhism of Indian origin that became particularly popular in the Chinese cultural realm. In its traditional form, it holds that Buddha Amitabha, immeasurable light, also called Amitayus, immeasurable life, has created a comparatively easy path of salvation or liberation. When Amitabha once, i.e. in an indefinite past, was the Bodhisattva Dharmakara, he vowed that out of his boundless compassion he shall earn enough karmic merit to create a Buddha land in which every being can easily understand and practice the Dharma and thus achieve final nirvana, or alternatively return to the world of samsara as an enlightened bodhisattva. He further vowed that all sentient beings, having heard his name, would attain rebirth in his pure Buddha land if they sincerely entrust themselves to his vow, aspire to be born in this land, and invoke his name. Excluded would be only those who committed the 5 grave offenses and slandered the true Dharma. In the foundational sutras of Pure Land Buddhism, Buddha Shakyamuni proclaims the good news that Bodhisattva Dharmakara became Amitabha Buddha. This implies that he had indeed fulfilled his vows, and thereby established a path of salvation which is much easier to follow than the traditional versions of Buddhist liberative practice. No wonder that this message became a message of hope for many who felt unable to achieve the Buddhist ideal of mental purity, to keep the monastic discipline, or just the more ordinary Buddhist precepts and practices. Entrusting themselves to Dharmakara, Amitabha's vows, they could hope that upon death, Buddha Amitabha, together with his 2 attendants, the Bodhisattvas Avalokiteshvara and Mahastama-prapta, would come and guide them to his Buddha land, Sukhavati, also referred to as Pure Land or Western Paradise. However, for some other branches of Buddhism, outside and inside the Mahāyāna tradition, this message would and did appear as a serious deviation from the Dharma as they understood it. Not only the apparent circumvention of the more demanding forms of Buddhist practice seemed to be suspicious. In addition to various Mahāyānians, the Pure Land tradition also seemed to contradict one of the crucial features of Mahāyāna, namely the insight into the spurious nature of all conceptual images of reality. Whereas the Prajnaparamita Sutras and their influential expositor, Nagarjuna, taught that liberating wisdom transcends all dualities, the Pure Land tradition apparently reveled in them. Far from the insight into the non-difference between nirvana and samsara, or the all-pervading reality of Buddha nature, Pure Land teachings seemed to be established on the presupposition of essential metaphysical dualities such as the Pure Land versus the impure land of samsara, liberation by other power versus liberation by self-power, and the nature of the Buddha versus that of sentient beings. Such allegations did not appear groundless, given that dualist interpretations were seemingly supported by some authorities within the Pure Land tradition itself. Is Pure Land Buddhism thus to be regarded as a deviant form of Buddhism? The case of Shinran, a mixed impression. In recent decades, a number of scholars of the Jodo Shinshu, a Japanese branch of Pure Land Buddhism going back to the teachings of the medieval Japanese master Shinran Shōnin, 1173 to 1263, claimed that the impression of a stark dualism would at least not hold true for Shinran's interpretation of the traditional narrative. Indeed, Shinran presents a reading of the tradition that clearly moves into a non-dualist direction. Let me mention some significant aspects. First, following the Chinese Pure Land master Shan Tao, 613 to 681, Shinran understood the Pure Land not merely as a celestial realm where one would easily attain to nirvana, but as one of the names or expressions of nirvana itself. Footnote: in his tract Yuishinsho Mon-i, Shinran develops this view by quoting Shan Tao's verse, "The land of bliss is the realm of nirvana, the uncreated." In his hymn on Shan Tao, Shinran contracts this verse by simply calling the Pure Land the uncreated. This is crucial inasmuch as Shinran subscribes to Nagarjuna's statement that there is ultimately no difference between nirvana and samsara. Footnote: see Nagarjuna's Mula Madhyama Karika 25, 19-20. There is no distinction whatsoever between samsara and nirvana. There is no distinction whatsoever between nirvana and samsara. What is the limit of nirvana? That is the limit of samsara. There is not the finest gap to be found between the two. Shinran refers to it indirectly by praising the Chinese Madhyamaka, i.e. a follower of Nagarjuna's philosophy, Tan Luan, 476-542, for having shown that birth and death, i.e. samsara, is itself nirvana. In his own reference to Nagarjuna, Shinran calls him the one who crushed the views of being and non-being. So if the Pure Land is a designation of nirvana, and if nirvana is not different from samsara, the Pure Land will ultimately not be different from this defiled world. Second, for Shinran, birth into the Pure Land happens not only after death. As the realm of nirvana, the uncreated, the Pure Land is a trans-temporal reality coexistent with samsara, so that birth or entry into it becomes a present option. Shinran draws this conclusion and teaches that, in a sense, birth into the Pure Land happens already at the moment when faith or trust, shinjin, in Amida's vow arises in one's heart. According to Ueda and Hirota, no Pure Land master prior to Shinran had taught that one attains birth in the present. Footnote. Yet there have been forerunners. According to Robert Scharf, the teachings of Chinese Pure Land master Tan Luan, 6th century, already implied that the Pure Land is the realm of samsara seen from the vantage point of the awakened. Philosophically, Tan Luan was a Madhyamika and exerted a strong influence on Shinran. Moreover, Shinran's view that birth into the Pure Land occurs with the arising of shinjin is closely connected to his interpretation of the conditions for birth as mentioned in the scriptural record of Dharmakara's or Amida's, that is Amitabha or Amitayus's, central vow. According to Shinran, our defiled mind is not capable of fulfilling these conditions. Our heart is not really sincere, unable to trust, and not truly aspiring for the Pure Land. Footnote. In Tannisho 9, Shinran states regarding the fear of death, "It is hard for us to abandon this old home of pain, where we have been transmigrating for innumerable kalpas down to present, and we feel no longing for the Pure Land of peace, where we have yet to be born. Truly, how powerful our blind passions are! The idea that the aspiration or longing for liberation does not originate in the blind self, but is brought about by Buddha nature has a long prehistory in Mahāyāna, as is written in the Ratnagotra Vibhaga 1:40-1. If there were no Buddha element, one would not become sick of suffering and want to seek after or aspire for nirvana. Seeing the fault with existence, suffering, and the virtue of nirvana, bliss, happens because of having the gotra. It does not happen in those without it. According to this reasoning, the dissatisfaction with samsaric existence presupposes some hidden familiarity with, and therefore imminent presence of, the transcendent realm. Otherwise, no longing for liberation would ever arise. Sincerity, trust, and aspiration are rather features of Amida's own mind. Amida was full of sincerity, trust, and aspiration for the Pure Land when he, as Bodhisattva Dharmakara, vowed to establish the Pure Land. According to Shinran, all three mental qualities coincide in Shinjin. Hence, if Shinjin arises in us, we are actually participating in Amida's mind, shared with us by Amida out of boundless and unconditioned compassion. Thus, with Shinjin, we are already in the presence of Amida and therefore already born into his land. In addition, Shinran does not see the invocation of Amida's name as a further condition for birth into the Pure Land. To him, the invocation, Nembutsu, is rather an expression of gratitude. Likewise, in saying the name, the dualist difference between Amida and the invocating person is transcended. For according to Shinran, Nembutsu is both the calling of Amida's name and the name itself. If saying the name is itself the name, the reception and the recipient of Amida's compassion are both part of Amida's reality. In saying the name, the presence of Amida's mind in us as shinjin manifests itself in the realm of form. Furthermore, according to Shinran, the exclusion of those who committed the 5 grave offenses and are slanderers of the Dharma applies to all sentient beings. Everybody has been at least a slanderer of the Dharma, if not in this life, then in the beginningless chain of one's previous lives. And everybody will be able to commit all kinds of deeds, good or evil, if only the respective karmic conditions are given. According to Shinran, the purpose of the evildoer's exclusion in Amida's vow is to show that everybody is excluded if we look at the vow from the perspective of our own entanglement in the defilements. To Shinran, the real point of the exclusion is therefore to show that actually nobody is excluded if seen from the perspective of Amida's boundless and unhindered compassion. We are excluded from liberation if we depend on self-power, tariki. But none is excluded dependent on the other power, tariki, of the vow. The vow is precisely made for the evil ones. The vow is made for me alone, as Shinran says in one place. Third, Shinran's confidence that the heart of the person of Shinjin already and always resides in the Pure Land is also intrinsically connected to his understanding of the nature of Amida, which takes us to a further major non-dualist strand in Shinran's thought. Shinran sees Amida as a manifestation, or better, the manifestation, of ultimate formless reality. Following again the work of Tan Luan, Shinran applies the Madhyamaka teaching of the 2 realities, ultimate reality, Paramartha Satya, and conventional reality, Samvritti Satya, to the Yogacara teaching of the 3 Buddha bodies, Trikaya, by distinguishing between the Dharmakaya, Dharma body, as suchness, and the Dharmakaya as skillful or compassionate means. The Dharma body as suchness is identical with ultimate reality and thus with nirvana. It is beyond all form and conception. Therefore, as Shinran says, it pervades the countless worlds. It fills the hearts and minds of the ocean of all beings, including plants, trees, and land. From this ultimate reality, the Dharma body as compassionate means emerges. Dharma body as suchness has neither color nor form. Thus, the mind cannot grasp it, nor words describe it. From this oneness was manifested form, called Dharma body as compassionate means. This manifestation of form from the realm of formless oneness, or non-dual suchness, is described as the story of the Bodhisattva Dharmakara, of his vows and their fulfillment in becoming Amida Buddha. To Shinran, this story expresses the essence of the teachings of all Buddhas. All Buddhas in the countless worlds radiate the compassion and wisdom of Amida, including Shakyamuni, whom Shinran understands as an incarnation of Amida. The 3 Buddha bodies are thus reflected in the distinction between the Dharma body as suchness, Dharmakaya as formless reality, its manifestation as Amida, Sambhogakaya, and its incarnation in Shakyamuni, Nirmanakaya. Amida, says Shinran, is the form through which formless reality makes itself known or reveals itself to sentient beings. Footnote. See also Hirota's fitting statement, it is not simply that Buddha is a human being who attains Buddhahood, but that Buddhahood assumes human form of becoming Amida. Conversely, Amida is the means that makes us realize the formless Supreme Buddha that assumes form in Amida. Shinran's scenario of an ultimate reality that is formless and hence pervades the countless worlds, revealing itself as Amida in order to make sentient beings recognizing Amida as a or the means toward the realization of the formless ultimate, clearly presents non-duality as the framework of a dynamic and, given its soteriological dimension, dramatic dynamism. To be sure, Shinran's intention is not to replace the traditional narrative of Pure Land Buddhism, but to reformulate it in a way that radicalizes its existential dimension. At that level, we find central features of a strongly dualist spirituality in Shinran's work. First, despite his identification of the Pure Land with nirvana and of nirvana with samsara, Shinran continues to insist on the strong difference between the pure and radiant light of transcendent reality and the impure and dark nature of the defiled world. Indeed, with the rise of Shinjin, one has immediately attained birth into the Pure Land. However, this shinjin entails the hopeful confidence to be born there after one's death. Thus, one is already born precisely by trusting to be born in the future. Or in Shinran's own words, attain means to have attained what one shall attain. Second, despite his emphasis on the dharmakaya as suchness pervading the hearts and minds of all beings, he insists on the strong difference between the defiled, ego-driven mind and the pure Buddha nature. For example, he can say in one and the same verse, "Mind nature is from beginning pure. But as for this world, there is no person of truth." For Shinran, the self is false and insincere, and completely lacks a pure mind. Our performance of good acts is also poisoned. That is, even good deeds are, according to Shinran, tainted by self-centered motivation. They are a self-cultivated good. Third, Shinran therefore emphatically rejects the idea that liberation could be achieved by self-power, tariki. The only path to liberation is to rely in shinjin on the other power, tariki, that is, on the power of Amida's compassionate vow. Shinran's strong distinction between ineffective self-power and liberating other power can be seen as a further form of dualism. For such reliance on other power happens only by entrusting oneself to someone else, that is, to Amida as our loving parent, despite the fact that Shinran understands this act of entrusting as a participation in Amida's own mind. Non-dualism lived as dualism. How would one explain the continuing presence of such dualist features next to the undisputable non-dualist tendencies in Shinran's writings? Is he just inconsistent? The natural answer will be that Shinran is presenting a specific interpretation of the traditional Mahāyāna teaching of two truths, or realities. In Sanskrit, satya means both truth and reality. In many places of Buddhist writings, it seems better to translate satyadvaya as two realities instead of two truths. The conventional reality, literally the worldly veiled reality, loka samvritti satya, is marked by an inevitable conceptual dualism, while the formless ultimate reality is characterized by the denial of all conceptual constructs, whether in the form of dualist contrasts or monistic identifications. But what then is the relation between these two realities? Is this itself a dualist or a non-dualist relation? The answer depends on the perspective one assumes. From the perspective of conventional reality, the relation is a dualist one because ultimate reality is radically different from the conventional reality of our ordinary experience. Yet from the perspective of ultimate reality, the ultimate is the one and only reality, infinite, unhindered, and unrestricted. Conventional reality would appear as a form of delusion, as maya or avidya, the not seeing of truth or true reality. And as an absence of something, delusion is nothing. That is, it is not ultimately real. At best, conventional reality would be the veil or mask of the ultimate, produced by the ultimate itself. Footnote. Note that part of the original meaning of Maya is the power to produce magical, illusionary appearance. However, if one holds that the relation between the two realities can be and needs to be defined in two very different ways, namely as radically dualist and as radically non-dualist, depending on the perspective, we are still left with a dualism, the dualism of two different perspectives. As I understand Shinran, he does not reject this distinction between a dualist conventional perspective and a non-dualist ultimate perspective. Nor does he deny that, in the end, ultimate reality is the one and only true reality. To Shinran, the crucial question is rather how or in which way ultimate oneness or non-dual reality manifests itself. How does it appear under the conditions of the illusory conventional reality? Shinran holds that ultimate reality is not manifest by the disappearance of conventional reality, but by a different way of experiencing conventional reality without its disappearance, including the corresponding defilements, that is, its dark and evil aspects. Footnote. If one accepts Fabian Völker's distinction between asymmetric and symmetric types of non-dualisms, Shinran's distinction between the two perspectives would put him into the asymmetric camp, because the relation between these two perspectives is asymmetric. Shinran seems to hold that existentially non-dual unity is paradoxically realized only in maintaining the dualist perspective of conventional reality. All else would run the risk of absolutizing that which is and remains relative. Shinran strongly warns against the danger of religious forms of self-centeredness or self-aggrandizement. Considering and presenting oneself as enlightened, as someone who has left samsara and all defilements behind, may very well be a sign of being trapped in the snare of self-centeredness, which is the root and core feature of samsaric existence and all its accompanying evils. All beings lack a true and sincere heart. Even those who renounce this world have nothing but thoughts of fame and profit. To Shinran, the self cannot overcome the self. Liberation from the self rather happens in giving up all reliance on the self by entrusting oneself completely to a power or reality that in the realm of conventional reality is inevitably perceived as radically different from the self, so much so that even this entrusting is not regarded or experienced as one's own work. Footnote: it would be interesting to see to what extent analogous versions of justifying a dualist conception within a non-dualist framework by this kind of spiritual reasoning might be found in other non-dualist traditions. Shinran retains both the conventional and the ultimate perspective. He translates this epistemic second-order dualism into a spirituality which realizes non-dualism in a dualist way. This means that one lives simultaneously in two worlds, or two realities. Defilements and self-centeredness do not disappear, but one's relation to them is decisively altered when the defilements are perceived in the light of Amida's other power, and the corresponding gratitude for his unhindered, all-embracing compassion. Shinran compares the defilements to clouds that cover the light of the sun, i.e. shinjin, but the sun is strong enough to give light even beneath the clouds. This realization excludes, right from the start, any kind of religious or other self-glorification. So, Shinran can also say about himself that he is teaching only for fame and profit, and that hell would clearly be his destination anyway. Instead of being suppressed or denied, one's own inextricable failures are seen ever more clearly in the light of Amida's compassion. Full awareness of the defilements drives one deeper into the arms of Amida. In that sense, the defilements become an instrument of trusting, of nourishing shinjin, and hence assume a positive function. Obstructions of karmic evil turn into virtues. This transforms the person of shinjin into a bodhisattva without making him or her a saint. To the extent that in relation to others people do not pretend their own holiness but simply show their gratitude to and radical dependence on Amida, they point others in the right direction. That is, they live the message that Amida, and not they themselves, is the only hope. Thereby, they paradoxically act as true bodhisattvas, helping others to find their own way to liberation by embracing Amida's vow. In so doing, people of Shinjin participate in Amida's liberating activity. This is how Shinran reinterprets a further element of the traditional Pure Land teaching, the idea that those who made the bodhisattva vows will return from the Pure Land as enlightened bodhisattvas to the world of samsara for the benefit of all other beings. When Shinran says that one is already born into the Pure Land by trusting to be born there in the future, the same paradoxical structure applies to the idea of return. The person of Shinjin functions as a returned bodhisattva by denying all good on one's own side and trusting, hoping to become a true bodhisattva in the future. Shinran obviously regarded the patriarchs of Pure Land Buddhism and explicitly his teacher Honin as people who lived in the modus of return, and in this sense as manifestations of Amida. Hope and trust imply a dualist structure. One trusts in someone different from oneself, Amida's other power, and hopes for something good in the future, becoming an enlightened bodhisattva in the Pure Land, as different from the evil of the present, being subject to the defilements. For Shinran, it is precisely in the dualist dynamism of such trust and hope that the non-dualist ultimate reality reveals and manifests itself. Keiji Nishitani, 1900 to 1990, has expressed this paradoxical structure quite fittingly. In the attainment of Shinjin, the Pure Land, which is always the future, is also the present, without ceasing to be the future. Without collapsing the temporal sequence between present and future, the future is here the present, and the present is the future. The religious existence called Shinjin consists precisely in the emerging presence of this simultaneity. Distinction is non-distinction, non-distinction is distinction. According to Nishitani, such simultaneity of dualism and non-dualism gives expression to the condition of a man who, while abiding in historical actuality, lives at the same time with Amida, and, while living with Amida, at the same time abides in historical actuality. Shinran gives this paradoxical simultaneity further nuances by drawing on the Taoist concept of spontaneity or naturalness, which he calls jinen. In his use of jinen, we can distinguish at least three important aspects. First, jinen indicates that whatever is truly good arises spontaneously, naturally, as a manifestation of Amida's true nature working in us through shinjin, and not as an act of self-centered human calculation. Repeatedly, Shinran emphasizes that true goodness is not brought about by the person's self-centered calculation, but spontaneously or naturally in the sense of being the fruit of Amida's work. This ties in with a word from Honin that Shinran quotes frequently. In other power, no working is the true working. Here, too, Shinran emphasizes that such no working is working without calculation. The relatedness to the Taoist concept of non-action, wu wei, is obvious, and thus complements the likewise Taoist naturalness, spontaneity in Shinran's concept of jinen. Second, in his use of jinen, Shinran underlines that the fruit of such true working is truly good. Even when we are evil, if we revere the power of the vow all the more deeply, gentle-heartedness and forbearance will surely arise in us through its spontaneous working, jinen. Jinen implies to acquire the Tathagata's virtues through entrusting ourselves to the vow power. Hence, Shinran leaves no doubt that shinjin is the heart of great love and compassion, and that this shinjin is Buddha nature. Third, given his conviction that Amida is an expression in form of the formless Dharma body as suchness, Shinran uses jinen also as a term that signifies this ultimate formless reality. Supreme Buddha is formless, and because of being formless, is called jinen. Jinen is thus directly related to the all-pervading formless Buddha nature that fills the hearts and minds of all beings. This non-dualist dimension of jinen contrasts with the more dualist aspect of rejecting self-power, jiriki, in favor of other power, tariki, inasmuch as in terms of jinen, Amida's other power is presented as the power of one's true Buddha nature, which may easily be understood as one's true self. That is, at the level of conventional, dualist reality, the non-dualist aspect of jinen may lead to a new reinforcement of self-power instead of other power. Shinran therefore adds a revealing warning to his considerations of jinen. If we continuously discuss jinen, that no working is true working will again become a problem of working. It is a matter of inconceivable Buddha wisdom. In Shinran's usage, no working as true working signifies other power, while working refers to self-power. Thus, for Shinran, within the sphere of the dualist, conceptually structured conventional reality, transconceptual, inconceivable non-dualism must not be translated into a religious form of self-reliance, which Shinran seems to regard as a danger in mistaken Buddha nature thought, but needs to assume the form of complete other reliance, that is, entrustment to Amida as our loving parent. There is, however, one aspect in Shinran's teaching where his overall non-dualist background moves to the foreground of conventional reality. His conviction that all beings are existentially in the same desperate situation, that we are not good persons, nor persons of wisdom, that we have no diligence, but only indolence, and within, the heart is ever empty, deceptive, vainglorious, and flattering, in combination with his confidence in Amida's all-embracing, none-excluding compassion, leads Shinran to seriously question any religiously motivated hierarchical differentiation of human beings and the corresponding social realities. Distinctions between good people and bad people, noble and low, between those with shallow knowledge and high knowledge, between the poor people and the rich and well-born people of rank, and between those who hold the precepts and those who break them, lose, in his perspective, their spiritual meaning and are therefore also relativized in their social relevance. During his exile, Shinran came in contact with people who spent their lives under severe hardship. Among them were the outcasts of the medieval Japanese Buddhist society, who had to earn their livelihood as hunters and fishers, that is, by killing living beings. According to Shinran, there is no reason to look down on them and consider oneself as any better. The hunter is one who slaughters many kinds of living things. They are called low. Such hunters are none other than we. In the light of Amida's all-encompassing compassion, one should abandon the judging of people as good or bad. Not all non-dualist masters have translated their non-dualism into a form of socio-religious egalitarianism. It is no surprise that until modern times, the so-called Byurakumin, Japan's discriminated and stigmatized outcasts, regarded Shinran as their true friend or companion. Conclusion. Non-dualist religious teachings are beset with a common problem. If the ultimate is the only reality, i.e. in Vedic parlance, the one without a second, and if the ultimate is good because of its perfection, where does the dualist perception, where does illusion, avidya, come from? From a logical point of view, it has to come from the one and only ultimate reality itself. Even if delusion is described as privation, that is, if it is declared as something non-existent, but just as a deficit, the basis for this deficiency cannot be anything but the one and only ultimate reality itself. Shinran's attempt to establish a spirituality which takes non-dualism as something to be realized by and within a dualist conception does not escape this problem. If some strains of Mahāyāna, including Shinran, understand the ultimate as the universal Buddha nature, delusion must come from Buddha nature itself. Yet this sounds counterintuitive because it implies that delusion is ultimately good and not evil. Some religious thinkers followed that line and argued that delusion is indeed good, though only inasmuch as it is the condition which makes human freedom possible. Human freedom is then seen as precious because it implies the possibility of freely acknowledging and practicing what is good. However, for Shinran, something is good precisely if it is not regarded as the result of our own choice, which he sees as always bound to self-calculation. So we end up with what John Hick, following Donald Bailey, has called the paradox of grace, as found in 1 Corinthians 15:10, where Paul says, "I worked harder than all, yet not I, but the grace of God that was with me." If I am right, the metaphysical implications of this paradox of grace lead us to a circular movement. On the one hand, if we assume non-dualism at the level of ultimate truth, reality, we end up with presumably insoluble logical contradictions at the level of conceptual truth. On the other hand, it is precisely the existence of such insoluble contradictions which, according to Nagarjuna, is the strongest reason to reject dualism. Seeing that insoluble contradictions are built into the fabric of conventional perception of reality indicates that a dualistically structured perception does not represent reality as it really is. Following that trail, one may not take non-dualism as metaphysics, but as a cipher that points beyond all conceptual constructs to the unfathomable nature of true reality. In Shinran's version, this cipher assumes the form of a mythological narrative which invites us to entrust ourselves to the ultimate mystery of reality with hope and confidence instead of fear, suppression, or denial. If you realize that the wisdom of the Buddhas surpasses conceptual understanding, there should not, in addition, be any calculating. Simply give yourself up to Tathagata's vow.